Today's lesson is all about the sanding machines, what we use them for, and the differences between them, and just how to use them safely. So, thinking about our first section, obviously that's what our title would be. So, what does a sanding machine do? Well, obviously it does what sanding does, but faster. And do all sanding machines do the same thing? No, they don't. They all work in slightly different ways for slightly different purposes. Some are more expensive, some are less expensive, and so therefore they all have different kind of jobs that they do. So our aims and objectives to understand the function of a variety of different sanding machines. We're going to be familiar with how to use machines safely, or one particular machine, and to identify the purpose of different sanding machines. And then obviously the best is to be able to identify the parts as part of our journey through how we use machines within the workshop. So what do we use sanders for? Sanders work in the same way that hand sanding does. So it uses fabric or paper with small particles of grit all over it, and that creates a rough, or what we call abrasive paper. And then you use that to rub down the material to make it smoother, take off any rough bits or any markings that are on top of it. What the machines do is they just do it much faster. So they put the abrasive paper on the end of a moving motor. It moves in a certain direction or a certain way, but it will move that at a much faster speed, much more rapidly than you'll be able to do it by hand. It's good for large areas, good for things that you just put a lot of effort into. So it can wear down small amounts of wood to make them even or increase the smoothness so it's ready for applying a surface finish like polyurethane varnish or wax. How many sanding machines? So there's lots. We're going to look at 6 different ones today. The first 3 up here are the belt sander. They're all handheld, these 3. The belt sander, which you would use, and it's basically like a treadmill, and it runs in one solid direction, quite forceful. Quite often it's used with larger grit paper to remove uneven material on large flat surfaces. The next one is the corner sander. It tends to sort of have this vibrating motion as opposed to the paper moving solidly. And it's used to get into awkward corners. Say you've got the inside corner of something, it will allow you to do that much more easily than if you were doing it by hand. Now, it doesn't tend to be used to remove big bits of material or bigger bits of material because it is quite small, and the motion on it is not very rough. It's not very forceful. So it doesn't, even if you've got rough glass paper on there, it doesn't take down that much material compared to a belt sander. And the final one is an orbital sander, and that will that sort of rotates in a sort of a massaging motion, so to speak, and it's quite often used with finer grit paper to produce a good quality smoothness, because the motion reduces the amount of marking on wood. Quite often it's used for buffing things, and you might use an orbital sander to buff up a finish to a high shine. Now we've got some bigger floor mounted machines, often floor mounted, sometimes desk mounted or bench mounted. The first one up the top is the oscillating spindle sander, quite often referred to as a bobbin sander, and that is basically that little cylinder is coated in glass paper, and it rotates in a direction and moves up and down as well, and that allows you to remove the waste from the inside of a curved piece of wood. It's not usually used for fine finishing, as changing the bobbins that go on top take quite a lot of time, and you can get different radius bobbins as well, so you can change the size of the radius that you're using. The disc sander is the next one down, and this basically is just a large disc of glass paper that rolls around. Now, because it rolls around in a rotary motion, it doesn't tend to go with the grain of the wood, so it tends to leave marks on it. So you don't tend to use it for making fine finishing, but you do use it for removing more pieces of material to get to that finish, to get to the material to where you want it to be. So it's more for removing material than it is for creating a fine finish. And the last one is a band facer. These are the ones that we have at school. They're used for removing material from flat or external curves on wood. The flat direction of motion allows for a better finish to be achieved, but because the belts take a long time to change, we don't tend to change them for a finer grade of glass paper, just because it takes time to change them. So we tend to just use it for removing material, but you could get a nicer finish with it if you needed to. And obviously if you apply less pressure, it won't score the wood as much either. Okay, so in order to understand how it works, we've got some labels so we understand what all the parts do. I'm just going to talk through them now. So here we have number one is the upper belt guard. So if that belt was spinning around and it was exposed, you might accidentally touch it, which means that's not going to be very safe, because you might get trapped or whatever, you injure yourself or ruin the piece of work. So that guard basically slides over the belt sander to make sure it's not exposed, and you would only expose as much of the belt that you need to sand the object that you're sanding. Number two is they're the little knobs that you undo to adjust that upper belt guard. Number three is the abrasive belt, so that is the sanding belt that you would push your work against. Number four is the table or the bed that you put the work on. Now when you use a sanding machine like this, you always put your work on the bed, on the table. You don't raise it up off there, because the force of the belt will just force it back down again. You might have an accident with that. So it also keeps the work nice and flat and even, so it's always a nice 90-degree angle. Or if you choose to adjust that bed, you can adjust that to be a different angle as well if you need to. Number five is the emergency stop. So if you have any problems, any issues, you should be able to use your knee or your foot to push the stop button, depending on where the stop button is. So that emergency stop is placed for that, so you don't need to use your hands. Number six is the extraction shake handle. So the extraction, what that does is it's basically works like a hoover, and it will, obviously sanding creates quite a lot of dust, a lot of sawdust. So what the extractor does is it actually vacuums that dust up into a large storage unit within the where number 13 is really within the actual unit itself. So that basically reduces the risk of anyone breathing in too much dust. Can lead to lung problems, or if you've got asthma, that's a real problem as well. And what the extraction shake handle does is it shakes out the filter and clears it out, so it just drops some more of that sawdust into the extraction tray, which is number 7. So you can take that, remove it, empty it, and have it fresh, empty, so to take some more of your waste dust. Number 8 is a rear belt guard. Obviously we need to cover it at the back as well in case we touch it, so as it's rotating around, that would be a problem. Number 9 is the table adjustment release. So you can undo that to change the angle of the bed to be a different angle, so you can angle the piece of wood that you're sanding. Number 10 is the motor cover. Underneath that cover there's a big motor that turns around, that turns the roller that turns the sanding belt around. 11 is the on button, 12 is the off button, and 13 is the big extraction unit. So that's all the parts and what they do. So the final part of this lesson is just a risk assessment. Obviously machines can be incredibly dangerous, and what we're going to look at, the little playlist of videos. They're not it's not a video that I've put together specifically for teaching how the band facer works, but they will do the job of seeing it in action and seeing how it works. The first one, the Year 7 pencil case sanding end pieces, is quite a good one as a general overview, but the other ones give you an idea of what you can do with a band facer as well. So what you'll do with that is you'll look at the hazards, try and find out what the hazards are, and work out how do we minimize those hazards, how do we control them, and then that's what you need to get done. There is no home learning. Just reflect on what you've done and understand how to use the machines when you get to the workshop.